All right, welcome back to the Classical Republican. I'm here with the Last Born in the Wilderness, and we are talking about anarcho-communism. This is part two. So the next question is going to be about liberty. So among classical Republicans, well, depending on the source, the author, the historical experience, you have the equality and liberty being very, very closely tied together. So as far as anarcho-communists, negative or positive liberty?
I mean, it would be the idea of having um, non-domination, right? So whatever that would be. So basically, the idea that whatever freedom that would exist would come from, um, it would just come from not having a coercive structure telling you how to conduct your life, but also recognizing how your decisions affect the community and those that are around you is a big part of it as well. Because there's freedom for the capitalists that can do what they want, but if you have to work for the capitalists, then you don't really have the freedom. So there's freedom at the expense of others, you know. So whatever that would fall under, the idea that you can't really have true liberty or freedom without the liberation of others as well. Um, that has to be included. Otherwise, you're just exploiting others. You're denying others their freedom. And it creates a really imbalanced situation, society. So, yeah.
In an anarcho-communist society, how would you preserve that liberty?
Yeah, I mean, I guess you just have to have a That's a good question. Obviously, if things start to become imbalanced, I mean, this is actually where it gets important. It's important to look to other examples of how power was allocated and distributed among various groups and societies. So I think we can get a bit myopic. We can get a little focused on ourselves and like, how the hell do we do this? How do we, deal with power and inequality of authority or power or whatever it is? There are many, and without appropriating other groups, but definitely taking examples of like how indigenous societies dealt with distributing power. So if there was an individual who started to accumulate more wealth than the rest of the community, they would have some kind of ceremony or some sort of feast or some sort of thing that would allow that person to give much of their wealth away. And that is a cultural function as much as it is an economic one. Because we should all well know that if you start to accumulate more than others and and it affects their ability to live and to be free in and of themselves, it creates resentment. It creates all kinds of hostility and conflict within different groups and communities. And so, yeah, this is the tricky thing because if a person is not willing to give back, then that's where you start to think about the next steps of how to deal with that situation. Um, and I know it gets pretty drastic at certain points. I mean, it's very rare, but you get to the point where like, okay, this person's not playing game. Well, they're going to be kind of banished from the community. They're not going to be able to participate with us. We're not going to do, I would say, business, but we're not going to be able to work with them anymore. Um, and that affects them on a really deep level. So they begin to comply. And I know that is in and of itself a form of coercion, but there's different points where you kind of have to assert, like for the sake of the community, for the sake of others, you got to be able to assert some things and be like, look, this is sacrificing the tranquility, the equality, the principles of what we're trying to accomplish here. And that's something that I think the community would have to recognize, as individuals, is like, this needs to happen. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I mean, and I just want to be clear, like anarchism is meant to be a critique of many of the ideologies that exist. Although it is its own ideology and can have ideologies within it, if something isn't working, it needs to be critiqued. It needs to be taken apart and figured out, like, why isn't this working? So anarchism is actually quite spacious. It's very large. It's able to include a lot of different ways of living and being and decision making under that. Yeah.
So if you have an individual, um, because of his wealth or power, he's able to dominate. So what if there is a majority? What if there's a tyranny of a majority that wants to oppress minorities? How would that be handled in an anarchist society?
Well, I guess, I mean, it wouldn't be an anarchist society if that existed. So the society itself wouldn't be anarchist. There would be maybe a minority of people that would call themselves anarchists, which actually exists today. We'd have a majoritarian of people in, say, the United States, within the nation state of the US, that kind of believe in it on some fundamental level. They believe that this is how things are meant to work and function. Um, I mean, anarchists have always, I mean, this is actually a really interesting thing because anarchism often is, it's like it's always on the defensive, or it's always in reaction to something. So when it comes down to actually building something, sometimes maybe this is a cultural, this is something that exists within specific contexts, not in other places. And historically, we know that there's other examples of this, that where they've actually built something. But I think contemporarily, one of the things anarchists have trouble with, I could be wrong in saying this, but really good at throwing Molotov cocktails at police and fighting people and this, and doing like little mutual aid things. That's very, very good. But like building something that's sustainable and that can last generation to generation and build on itself, it's not always something that I think many anarchists are capable of doing. It feels to me that anarchism is a reaction to something, and so that's kind of the struggle here, because when does anarchism actually become regenerative? When it has actually become something that is able to feed itself and to exist without it being in reaction to capitalism or the state or whatever it is? And so, yeah, I mean, you're talking about majoritarianism. I think if the majority believes in something that is fundamentally racist, that is fundamentally built around the ideals of white supremacy, that is fundamentally built around the legacy of colonialism, or all these things, anarchists will resist against it. And that means fighting. I mean, I don't know. That's why they have such an antagonistic relationship with police, because anarchists see the police as a function, as a boot of the state. And ultimately, that the very idea of the police itself is to uphold private property, to uphold the state, to uphold the interests of capitalists, ultimately, and to perpetuate white supremacy. And so that's why there's always this anti-cop sentiment within anarchist circles, is because they're the antithesis of what anarchists really want in a society. They tend to represent everything that they hate about this society that we live in. So yeah, the majority might support the police. The majority might support the military. The majority might support whatever it is. If that majority is in favor of a system which denies life and liberty and prosperity from other people, then it is fundamentally against the ideals of the anarchists and must be abolished. Yeah.
How do anarchists view class? In my reading, especially in Marxism, class is a really important identifier. But it doesn't. Well, according to my reading, it doesn't seem as important but it's still an identifying factor among anarchists.
Yeah. Well, I think that class is a big part of it. I mean, it's maybe anarchists would maybe not have as, I don't know. This is an issue on the left in general, actually. I don't know how this fits into anarchism versus other tendencies, but because class is fundamental when we talk about inequality, when we talk about how capitalism or any other hierarchical socioeconomic system or whatever it is, how it operates is to create, these different divisions within societies that, and certain groups benefit from it and certain groups don't. And so class, of course, is fundamental. You have to understand class struggle in order to get anywhere. But I think on the left, there's this, I'm speaking again, this isn't just about anarchism. On the left, there's this thing where it's like this conflict between those that want to focus on class as being the fundamental issue, and that's it. Well, not it, but that's the fundamental issue. And then others that want to talk about the legacies of colonialism, identity, what's called identity politics, things like this, which are not just about class. It's like the intersection of these different identities and these different categories of people, you could say, that exist, whether you're like, if you're a woman, if you're queer, if you're trans, if you're black, if you're white, if you're this, there's all of these intersecting identities that span across the class spectrum. So you could be a upper class black person, and you're still going to have the experiences of a black person within a white supremacist society, but you may benefit from the capitalist system that you are a part of. So there's this, complex thing that's happening, and that's where intersectional kind of theory, intersectionality comes in. So within anarchism, anarchists want to really fundamentally address class as much as they want to fundamentally address the legacies of white supremacy, the legacy of colonialism, of all these other forms of inequality. So maybe you're right in saying that class may not be as, because I think Marxists and others on that have that tendency tend to focus so much on class. And I think that anarchists may often have a more, and I don't know, making vast generalizations here, but they may have more of an intersectional approach to how they approach oppression and struggle and things like this. Yeah.
So what is to be done about inequality, political and social, economic inequality?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Would
the
an anarchist deal with that issue?
yeah. I mean, anarchists, they really want, what they really want to do is be able to practice anarchism. So how do we create communities that are built around the ideals of anarchism, which is to question illegitimate authority, to have decision-making processes that include everybody? What's the best way to go about that, right? So yeah, I mean, questions around how to do that. One is just to, some people just want to be like, well, let's just create our own space and let's ignore the state as much as possible and try to, if we can, we should just do that, and that's it. Some recognize that's not possible. You can't really achieve liberation without abolishing the state. So you'd have to fundamentally address that. I mean, yeah, I mean, anarchists are all about like, how do we organize collectively? How do we get people to join our movement and understand that this is the path that we should be taking collectively, especially now, because there's always been this sense that the stakes are really high, but they feel especially high right now. And so anarchists are very, very aware of like the ecological crisis or like climate disruption or a lot of the things that are results of extractive capitalism. And so how do you communicate to a population that the reason why a lot of these crises we're experiencing contemporarily are a result of this capitalist system? How do you like communicate that to a population, and how do you then begin to practice anarchism in everyday life? And then how do you demonstrate to a population like, this is how we can do this, like this is one way in which we can structure our lives that is not going to be exploitive of other life, both human and non-human alike. So I think, yeah, I don't know how to answer your question except to say that, revolution is more than just being able to fight, physically. It's about being able to practice something that goes against the logic of capital and the state. Yeah.
So so my next question is about free markets. So I'm not talking about free markets inclusive of capitalism. So I'm talking more about prior to 300 years ago, maybe 400 years ago, when there were, well, I mean, depends on where you're talking about at that time, but the idea of a free market, prices are set by the individuals and who are engaging in that free market. What is the anarchist perspective on that?
This is where like, on the left or within anarchism, there's all these different tendencies, and I don't really understand all of them, so I can't speak to all of them. by any means, but yeah, some believe that there's some form of market that needs to exist. That I don't know, like there's some like radical ends of that where they're like, we need to abolish money altogether. We need to come up with like a gift economy. There's what is the name of it? There's some pretty interesting ideas around one of the reasons why capitalism functions is because of positive interest rates and how you need to actually do negative interest or what they want to call it that, but there's a name for it. I can't remember what it's called, where like money starts to devalue over time the longer you hold it. So you have to continue to circulate it in order for it to retain its value. Like, I don't know if that's exactly anarchism, but there's all kinds of ideas that exist about how to engage in trade or how to have a functioning economy that doesn't allow for capital or, well, even capital, but for somebody to accumulate resources and be able to hold on to it and then use it as a way to retain and expand their power over others. So I don't know how to answer your question except just to say that there's a lot of really good anarchist theorists that have and economists that have talked about this, and they've had a lot of different ways that they've approached this subject. So yeah, I don't know.
Okay. This is my last question. Do you feel that your ideology is ascendant or in decline?
Uh, I think it's ascended, probably. I think that there's probably more people that resonate with anarchist and communist ideas than have in probably decades or centuries even, maybe. Because I do think it's the nature of the crises that we're in today. I think a lot of people feel like they feel the grind. They feel like the systems that benefited their parents or their grandparents are not benefiting them, and so they're asking really deep and fundamental questions about what to do about that. Um, but at the same time, there's other ideologies and other things that have been maybe lying dormant or have been kind of at the periphery of society that are also coming into the forefront. That are coming into the center part of political consciousness right now, and that's also very dangerous. So there's a lot going on. I think anarchism is, or various forms of anarchism and far leftist ideologies, they're starting to become more, I think, recognized and adopted by especially younger generations today. I think that's my opinion. That's what I've seen anyway. Yeah.
And when you said more dangerous, you're also including like fascism,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like
Um,
far right ideologies. Yeah.
okay, so you would you say that like everything is uh, so, I guess some of these traditionally in the United States, traditionally more suppressed ideologies are having a comeback, and as neoliberalism starts to decline with that
Y-
state.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. I think that when the dominant, yeah, the neoliberal order is facing its end in many ways. It's starting to hold on. It's doing its damnedest to like keep on holding on because it's benefiting certain groups of people, very small group of people. But many people are struggling right now, and many people are seeing the cracks as they widen. And so there's a lot of ways in which we respond to that. And so people are attracted to identitarian politics, yeah, I don't want to get into this now here necessarily, but there's a few flashpoints in that. There was the uprisings last year. There were massive demonstrations and riots and all kinds of different forms of civil engagement, you could say, last year because of it was focused around police brutality and issues surrounding the legacy of the enslavement of African descendant people in this country, and the legacy of Jim Crow and policing, and I mean just like that whole knot of U.S. history that was being exposed. And then of course there was a reactionary side to that, which is the more far right perspective. Which another flashpoint in that was very recently with the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict that came out. A 17-year-old went across state lines. There were riots in Kenosha, and he shot 3 people. 2 of them died. People argue whether that was justified or not. That's a flashpoint in this sort of time we're in, where it's really a divisive issue. And it really says a lot where people's priorities lie. And actually, when we talk about the private property thing, that's a big part of it too, because do people have the right to defend private property by basically joining far right militias? So it's this whole question around that. So anyway, I think that these types of times, the time that we're living in currently, is so fraught that people are being attracted to. Yeah, I mean, and I acknowledge that far left ideas like anarcho-communism is a radical idea. It's it's on the fringe in many ways, but it's becoming accepted because people are looking for answers. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's all I have today. That was um, very enlightening. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Oh, I have one surprise for you. Because of the, I don't know if everybody knows about the relationship in Spain during the Civil War, but the anarchists were on the side of the Republic. Republic was kind of the umbrella term,
Yeah.
but there were Republicans who were helping in that, and along with communists and socialists and even conservative Republicans, there were some who were aligned with the anarchists fighting Franco and the fascists. So I have a
Oh yeah. You have like how many of those hats do you have?
oh, 7 or 8.
Oh my god.
I make them myself, so,
Do you?
so there you go.
That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
and
Wow.
yeah, I'm wearing my woolly pulley for military issue. So
Nice. All right.
so
Yeah,
when
you're
we
always
so just a nod to the time when we may have to unite in another united front to stop fascists, maybe.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a whole conversation in and of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have anything? Let's see. We talked about your channel, Last Born in the Wilderness, and your Patreon. Is there anything else? Any shout outs or anything you need to
Um,
express?
no, that's pretty much it. If people want to learn more, is my website is lastborninthewilderness.com. Everything they need to know is on there. It's pretty inclusive, has everything in there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good day.